All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just want to thank the Be Local PDX board and community for putting together Build and inviting me to share the future of business, which is about engaging your team and understanding and dismantling white supremacy culture. So before we get started, I'm just going to give a quick overview about Avenue and what we do and what role do we play in this work. And I think that in the spirit of transformation and looking ahead to the future, which is what this conference is all about this year, was thinking about, what role do we play? And I think that we are just beginning this journey. So I think in full transparency, coming here today to share the work that we have started as a team and as a company, because I believe that we can be the greater than the sum of our parts. And so one company, Avenue, singularly kind of tackling some of these questions is not going to have as big of an impact as engaging in conversation with like-minded B Corps, employees of B Corps, progressive companies. And so I hope to share some of what we've learned, my journey and experience, and just start a conversation. So I have some slides put together today that I want to talk through just to give the broader context for all of this, but I do want to save about 15 or 20 minutes at the end to engage in conversation. So I think the value is learning from all of you who are here today, and I want to hear what you are doing, what you are learning, and questions that you have and insights that you have found in this work. So Avenue is a B Corp, digital and social media agency for purpose-driven companies. And our purpose is to empower transformational change. That's kind of our big purpose as a company. And for us, that means that we're partnering with clients who embody these values. Many of those are B Corps, nonprofits, other progressive organizations, co-ops, but that facilitating marketing efforts to really further our clients' growth and impact. And just as for full transparency, we're just a marketing agency doing this work and sharing. I don't believe that we're experts, but I believe that we're learning and growing and doing some of this work along the way. And that in elevating the conversation, I hope that we can continue to learn and further this work. So as part of the process of sort of seeing and combating this invisible thing, it's important to acknowledge that we've all grown up and been shaped by institutions that have preserved systemic racism. So the schools we've gone to, the workplaces and environments, if you've ever been in government, financial institutions that we're a part of, not beneficial, but others, and places of worship. And so as a result, we've really held conscious and unconscious biases that influence how we've shown up in broader society and specifically our workplace. So first and foremost at Avenue, we have the honor of working with a longtime colleague and consultant, Alexis Brawley-James. She is the CEO of Construct the Present. She's actually going to be doing a keynote tomorrow morning at 9:15, I believe. So I encourage you all to tune into that. And so it's sort of been the process of unpacking our biases and unlearning the knowledge and the habits that we hold, myself personally as well. And so my personal journey of this learning and growth is, I believe, just beginning, but I'm excited to really share how my experiences and the approach and the insights have been put into practice. So the reason why I talk about assimilation, and it will tie back into the white supremacy culture discussion that we're going to have, is as a Korean American adoptee and immigrant, I really struggled throughout my childhood and early career to understand where I fit in. And as you can see here, I really felt that the dominant culture was really effective at telling me where I fit in, where I should be, thinking about the model minority myth and other cultural stigmas and biases. And really after recent events in the US, felt compelled to share sort of a snapshot of my own experience growing up. And since the pandemic began, probably heard many of these stats, but over 6,600 hate crimes against Asian Americans have been documented, and that's just kind of in that one area. And so the statistic is pretty staggering, and realizing that the experiences that I've had and many others go much deeper. So as a woman, Asian American business owner, fostering a diverse and inclusive company has been a key priority of mine. And so sharing this story is just an opportunity to sort of elevate and support those values. So going back to where it all began, as a Korean American adoptee, and you can see the photo here, I really struggled early in childhood and early career to figure out who I was. And I felt that oftentimes the who I was shaped by social norms and outside influences that I was really unaware of. But looking back, it became clear to me that sort of the culmination of these experiences of trying to fit in, who am I, really led me to where we are today. But in doing that, I had to learn very quickly sort of the skill of assimilation, which, in some cases I think can really be a positive, and in other cases I think can be detrimental. And so in varying situations and environments, was fortunate to be able to assimilate, to try and fit in wherever I could. But in doing so, it meant that I wasn't questioning things. I was taking what social norms were telling me I should do and should be, and assimilating into that persona. As I transitioned into my career, assimilation was also really key in helping me sort of adopt the social norms of the workplace. And that realizing that in order to advance or climb the ladder, that it was important to really fit in and adopt those workplace norms. So in other roles prior to Avenue, have been asked to adopt or even sort of acquire those sort of white male leadership traits in order to be more successful. So that might be more like this employee, or you need to be more extroverted. Some of those things that were sort of ingrained in me, I could not be successful without conforming to some of those specific workplace norms. And so for many years, I believed that I was better off trying to assimilate into someone else in order to advance in the workplace. So my experiences as a Korean American adoptee have really inspired me to prioritize anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion work at Avenue, and hopefully laying the groundwork for becoming a company that supports dismantling white supremacy culture in our own workplace, and also having conversations with other people so we can learn how to do that better and spread that conversation and awareness. So I do believe it's up to us as business leaders and employers of B Corps and other progressive companies to do our part to dismantle white supremacy culture. So what is it? A big question, and one of the resources that our team has really leaned on in this journey is through Dismantling Racism, DR Works, and I think there's a link on the next slide that I will share as well. But we're a society that has really normalized growth and prosperity through longstanding sort of colonialism and systemic racism. And when you take a closer look at these patterns, I can see that the environments that we've been in have really helped perpetuate some of these characteristics. And that really goes hand in hand with a lot of workplace cultures. So the big question is, what exactly is white supremacy culture? So the resource that I was referring to, and one that we really refer back to in our monthly work, both internally and with Alexis, as I had mentioned earlier, is from Dismantling Racism Works, DR Works, and those specific resources from Tema Okun here. And she characterizes white supremacy culture as a list of characteristics that show up in our organizations. And the culture piece is really powerful precisely because it's so present and also so very difficult to name or identify. So the characteristics that I'll list on the next slide are really damaging because they're often used as norms and standards without being proactively named or chosen by the group. Damaging because they promote the white supremacy thinking, and because we all sort of live in this sort of invisible culture, these characteristics often show up in the attitudes and behaviors of all of us. Even when we have the best of intentions, they subconsciously creep in. And so here's the list, and I'll just briefly read through little snippets to provide a little bit more context. But the first one is perfectionism. So, little time or energy or money putting into identifying lessons learned. It's a tendency to identify what's wrong, but not necessarily appreciate what's right. Sense of urgency, I think that one's pretty straightforward, but the sense of urgency really makes it difficult to be inclusive or encourage democratic and thoughtful decision-making. Defensiveness is just a structure that is set up and with energy spent trying to prevent abuse and protect power as it exists, rather than facilitate sort of the best out of each person. So the status quo is sort of the way it is, and there's not really room for conversation. Quality over quantity over quality, again, fairly straightforward, but all of the resources of an organization directed toward producing measurable results. So if you're a business owner like me, what have I done my entire career? Focus on measurable results, because that's what really drives the success of the organization. And so this one actually really had me think and continuing to think about this specifically as to how it relates to how Avenue runs an organization. Because as a business, we have to be producing something to be revenue, to be a sustainable business and do the work that we do. But what can we do what other ways can things be done that allow for more room and more space? Worship of the written word. So this is, if it's not in a memo, it doesn't exist. Probably experienced that in some way, shape, or form. Only one right way. So the belief that there's only one right way to do things. And once you're introduced to that one right way, there's really no wiggle room for anything else. Paternalism. So decision-making is clear to those with power, but unclear to those without power. Either or thinking. So things are either they're either good or they're bad, or they're right or they're wrong. Power hoarding. So there's no sort of value placed around sharing power. It's consolidating power, typically in leadership. Fear of open conflict. So people are in power are scared of expressing conflict and trying to ignore or run away from conflict, especially when someone raises an issue that causes discomfort. Individualism, so little experience or comfort working as part of a team. I'm the only one, which is connected to individualism, but the belief that if something is going to get done, I have to do it, not delegating. Progress is bigger, more. So this is one that really has always resonated with me, which is how it's observed and how we define success. So success is always bigger, it's more revenue, it's more people, it's more this and that. And so that's one that has really resonated with me, with Avenue. Objectivity. So there's a belief that there's no such thing as being objective or neutral. Right to comfort. So that's the final one, the belief that those in power have a right to emotional and psychological comfort. So I just want to take one moment, and we can go back to this slide as we get to the end on the discussion piece. But if there's any, just thinking that as you're kind of thinking through where some of these may have shown up in, current, past, present organizations, just to give it a little bit of thought. And I think that's the first thing, and ties into this next slide, which is just one of the tools that I have used at Avenue with regards to thinking about how to dismantle the white supremacy culture. And that's by noticing, shifting, and rewiring. And so the challenges that I had mentioned around being a business and needing to base business success on more revenue, more profit, more employees, those are all very important things. But what is sort of the pedestal that we put these sorts of things on, I think is the key challenge. And what also inspires me is just being part of the B Corp community, businesses that are thinking really deeply about these sorts of questions. And sort of the first step being noticing. So as part of the active process to unlearn my own white supremacy culture tendencies, I referred back to a tool from a book that I read called Start Here by Nate Klemp and Eric Langsher. And they have a tool in there that's called the Notice, Shift, and Rewire NSR tool. And it really is just about developing a moment-to-moment habit of attention. So just that, noticing and paying attention. And then in doing so, we can begin to notice and name our habits and tendencies around choices where we might be assimilating or going along with sort of the status quo, and which then brings around the choice where we can make a change, where we can shift what we do. So shifting brings about the change in action. And then the rewiring piece is around just continuing to notice and shift and bring around sort of that lasting neurological integration. And so both Klemp and Langsher refer to neurons that fire together wire together. So if we're noticing and then shifting, continuing to pay attention, we will eventually complete the circuit and be able to sort of rewire for positive change or change. And it really is possible to notice and rewire. So just a few examples, and I want to make sure that we save enough time for the discussion. But with regards to noticing, shifting, and rewiring, and we're a digital marketing agency, so for every company here in the room today, I think it will look a lot different. But for me, on the noticing side of things, it was noticing where they show up. One key and obvious place is the metrics by which we're defining success. As a company and being sustainable, we do have to have metrics that we're focusing on, but where sort of in the ladder of priority do those sit? And there's other healthy ways to show progress in the organization. One being that we now place a big emphasis on measuring how much PTO our team is taking. And that is from just the pure space of making sure that our team knows that taking care of themselves and giving themselves space to breathe, disconnect, and come back stronger is really important and is actually a key KPI for our success and our sustainability. Figuring out ways to approach daily tasks with more intention and less of a sense of urgency. On the shift side of things, just taking time to continually have the ongoing internal conversations and training around anti-racism and white supremacy cultures. This is something that we continue to talk about and work on a monthly basis. And then incorporating those learnings into all facets of our business, including our hiring process, client relationships, and so on and so forth. And then sustaining ongoing conversations to rewire that thought process. So making sure that we're able to utilize our high trust culture to have continued open and honest and authentic communication, and asking, what is my contribution, or what is Avenue's contribution to this work and this movement? And how can we leverage Avenue's access or my personal access to address privilege and white supremacy characteristics in a culture. And then the third is just looking for ways to respond to and interrupt bias when we see it show up. So reflection and dialogue, what we've learned at Avenue, before we get into the questions, there's a few more things here, really focusing our annual and our quarterly rocks or priorities around some of these learnings, and continuing to shift some of our internal processes and how we work with clients, and then making sure that we're continuing to have that conversation and prioritizing time in our calendars to have that on a regular basis. So the final piece is, I would ask everyone here to just consider sharing one insight or question with a coworker, a friend, or a family member today. I've included the resources here to Dismantling Racism Works, DR Works, and also another link for additional anti-racism resources from our team. So with that, I have a few questions here for reflection and dialogue, and I would love to, first hear questions, comments, but then also I'll read these out here and I can place them in the chat too, which is to think about a time when you assimilated into a culture where one or more white supremacy characteristics showed up. What was it like? Did you notice it at the time? And then when was there a time that you encouraged someone else to assimilate into a culture with white supremacy characteristics? What was that like? Did you notice it at the time? And then think about a time when white supremacy culture showed up in your workplace. How did it make you feel? How safe did you feel bringing it up? And then fourthly, what can your contribution be to this movement? How can you leverage access and address privilege to address the privilege in white supremacy culture? So with that, I can leave the screen shared so we can see this. Or actually, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I'll paste these in the chat. I think that conversation is often better when we can see each other in a little bit of a bigger squares here on Zoom. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll open it up first to questions and comments, and then I'm going to paste these into the chat.
I'd love to jump in with a comment or a question, actually, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Great. So Anna, thank you very much. I'm the co-founder and of a small strategic consultancy. So again, another agency like yourselves working in a client-focused way. So this is really helpful to sort of see how you have approached this work. I think, and our team is also consciously thinking about it, bringing practices in, et cetera. One challenge that we've had, and I'm wondering how you've managed it in your practice, is we might be trying to dismantle white supremacy culture internally, and we come across those characteristics in our clients as well. And so, how do you set the stage to be able to address those characteristics with your clients, knowing that we've all inherited sort of a power imbalance being in client service groups?
Yeah.
So how do you manage that? That's a big challenge. And we've actually had some actively harmful situations show up too. So, there's sort of the kind of white supremacy norms that we're always trying to battle against, but then we've actually had situations of harm. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And we have definitely wrestled with this. And I don't know that we have a 100% answer, but one of the ways that we've approached it is we do see that in power imbalance. We are the service provider. We have clients. They're the ones who are paying us money to do this work. And so there's that dynamic. And I think that for me specifically, I think it comes with being a lot more transparent with where we are as a company with the work. And so that over time, it becomes less and less of a surprise to clients. And then it makes it easier and easier over time to push back, or at least notice, bring it up, and not in a combative way by any means, but to raise it with clients. And that means that clients who have been with a company for a long time, who many years before any of this really started, there may be harder conversations with those clients, particularly if they're not aligned. And so I think just being aware that, it's going to take time, and that especially if it's a relationship that is valuable both ways, there's nothing that is being harmful in the relationship, that it might be more of a journey and just expecting a longer journey with that specific client. But for Avenue, my focus has really been on trying to be a lot more open and transparent about where we are, so that whether it's myself or a team member who might have a question like that, or we might want to raise it with a client in the future, there's just a lot more information available specifically from the company about where we stand.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Welcome. And yes, I will be sharing the slides, I think with the Be Local folks, and then maybe they can share them, or I'm happy to find a way to provide those at a later date. Ashley, I see your hand raised.
Thanks, Anna. My name's Ashley Henry. I'm the director of a group called Business for a Better Portland, and we have a lot of B Corps among our membership. And Anna, as you know, your leadership in this front has really influenced our work at BBPDX. In fact, last August, we closed the office for a week after being inspired by your LinkedIn post about the importance of rest and collective rest. And I think there's something about our culture here in Portland, at least, where that had been normalized enough by the time we made that decision that it wasn't perceived as, being slackers or something. But I definitely see like how the degree to which the white supremacy culture has influenced my own psyche, and how that was a difficult choice for me to make. And I also recognize some of the features or the characteristics of white supremacy in that slide that you put up about productivity and the KPIs that you mentioned and stuff. And I'm curious if you could maybe tell us and give us an example of where Avenue has had to sort of been at a fork in the road, like with a particular client, or maybe a decision around team productivity, for a lack of a better word, where you've consciously made a choice to step back, to acknowledge that perhaps it was the culture that was influencing that, prioritizing that goal over something else. Because I think we're all still operating within, a hyper productive capitalistic system that expects that of all of us. And so where do you make those, where and how do you make those decisions, and what quote sacrifices have you had to make? I mean, presumably it can at times result in less profit for your company or lower salaries for your staff? I mean, I'm curious, like, what are some of the metrics of that?
Yeah, so I'll try and address that as best I can. Thank you. That's such a good question. So in terms of productivity, we are a company that, we are doing a set amount of work for clients. We're in the service business, which I think several people here definitely are. And so, time is really money in that sense. And so it's been a really challenging balance for us to consider, okay, so there are these priorities, anti-racism priorities that we have as a company that we're super aligned with and that we are committed to carrying forward in our work. And yet as a company to be successful and be able to retain and grow and fairly compensate our team members, there has to be some sort of balance. And so I don't think we have the perfect solution, but one of the ways that we have started to try to address some of those questions and concerns is around boundary setting. And so we realized that there have been many times where, and I can point to many times where I maybe sent an email to a client or, a prospective client or a partner or whoever, at 8 p.m. at night or something like that. So that the expectation of a quick response, getting the email at, 8 and then responding at 8:01. I have done that in the past and have set probably an unconscious expectation over time, both with team members who might see those sorts of responses and or clients or other prospects who see those responses, that is the requirement for the company and working with clients. And so it's really started with boundaries of making sure that the team knows that they're not required to be responding after 5 p.m. so that we have really clear boundaries. And there's questions that come up and there's always going to be a custom circumstance of sorts, but that I can also model, signing off at a certain time, not emailing after a certain time, and making sure that during the work hours, we have very clear boundaries and expectations for, when, how fast do we respond, and that it's always in sort of those parameters. So no one feels pressured that it has to be 1 minute after the email came in, and that it doesn't have to be after, 5 p.m. at night.
And have you lost a client because of your shift in prioritization?
So I don't have data specifically to say that, clients, that would be a cause that hasn't come up. So actually, no, I think that the boundary setting when done in a proactive way, can really help set the tone for the relationship with sort of mutual respect in that regard. And we have had, I think, one instance where we were asked to sort of, when we shared those specific sort of boundaries that we have with regards to communication timelines and after hours questions that we were getting, we did put it into sort of an addendum to our contract that stated, the hours with which, our team will be online during during the week and our business hours, to be very, very clear. But that was just one instance. And then we just try really to model those boundaries with current clients, and then with future clients, just be very, very clear. We do actually have one slide in our proposal presentation for new clients that goes through sort of our thought process around boundaries and taking care of team members, which ultimately I believe takes care of our clients, because there's that longevity of the relationship when team members stay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. That's such a good question.
For anyone who's concerned about this, I had a really hard time setting boundaries too. And Volkswagen turns off their email servers for their employees 30 minutes after their shift ends, and it doesn't reopen them until 30 minutes before their shift starts. We at Beneficial State have started doing similar things where the expectation, if you respond after 7 p.m., your manager gets notified on something, and that includes all the way up to CEO of things. I think it's just little ways of this, that there are times you can respond, but the general expectation is that you don't after a certain time, and we communicate that to customers where we can. And it's been really helpful to pull back on those sides, because the initial fear, very white supremacist culture, the idea is I can't let go of this. I need to respond and need to care. But once you start making it and leading by example, like you do, Anna, at Avenue, it really does start showing your employees it's led to better retention. I'll share an article in the chat from Volkswagen that talks about how employee satisfaction of not being totally tethered to their email at all times of day, and feeling like there's leading by example is actually shown to lead the rest of their employees have a higher job satisfaction and retention of employees to not feel like they're expected to respond after a certain time frame. So I believe you get out, you put the universe, like you're saying, Anna, and there's times that losing a client could actually be a perspective of gaining bandwidth to serve a client who better serves your employees' needs and your expectations of your company values.
Yes, exactly what you said, Craig. Minna, I think I saw your hand raised at one point, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, my name's Mina. I'm the founder of Love Bottle. I'm also part of the Be Local PDX board, and I'm also part of the We the Change group, which is the women's founder CEO group within B Corp. And I really related to what you're sharing, and I loved how you brought up the slide with the characteristics of white supremacy, because as business owners, that whole quantity over quality was something as a business owner, especially with a product, it was a huge thing. And grappling with that and finding kind of my own version of success, like not just how many bottles, but what is the relationship that the end user gets with the bottle, and then really expanding that. And so really kind of looking at those various things of how we can define things on our own terms. And I find it makes the job more amazing and fulfills our missions more. And so I love that list that you provided. I also wanted to share just kind of a teaser. I'm sure it's going to be announced tomorrow, but Be Local PDX as a board has also worked with Alexis with Construct the Present for a 6 workshop series that's going to start in December. And so I'm sure they're going to do a bigger announcement and a sign-up sheet and all this stuff. But if you guys are interested in that work, that's something that will be an offering and a service of Be Local PDX that we're sharing with the community over the next 6 months, starting in December. And then within We the Change, for women who are B Corp founders or CEOs, if you're looking for deeper learning in the Jedi work, we're offering an 8-month foundational leadership training in Jedi work that will be offered to We the Change members. So you can go to their website. The training will launch January 2020 and applications for it will go out in November.
Thank you. That's really exciting. And Mona, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Mona. I work at Bridge City Media. We're mostly video production, but we're also doing a lot of other media strategy. So very similar. I'm really curious if you have any experience with setting realistic deadlines, because that's something I found in terms of sense of urgency, where things really fall through the cracks. And it's really hard because having quick turnarounds is like an edge, a competitive edge for our company, but it's also something that can become a challenge in combination with not trying to let projects run on too long.
Yeah, I think that is super important and definitely a challenge. At Avenue, and actually I'm going to give a big shout out. I see Audrey and Reed on here actually, and Audrey's our project manager and helps manage timelines and deadlines on all the projects for our clients. And I would say that sort of with that guidance, we have become increasingly more realistic about the time needed to complete and all the different factors that go into a project that you don't necessarily see on the front end, but behind the scenes, whichever team member might be working on it, there are specific nuances and things that just take time, and that to be realistic, we have to set expectations with clients up front. So one of the ways that we do that, so we do track time. So we're in the service business, so we have good general estimates for how long things take. So that's really helpful. But we also talk through with any new potential client who might come on board is before we commit to a start date, is making sure that we know exactly when and how long something will take, so we can set those expectations before a contract is even signed. And then just being really, really clear before we even get started that if this research project, for example, is going to take, on average, let's just say 4 to 6 weeks, we're always going to make sure that we set those that timeline accordingly and just communicate as clearly as possible on that. And usually it's a conversation between multiple team members. So it's not just one person's perspective saying this is how long it should take or I think it should take, but it's what's the perspective from the person who's actually going to be doing the work for how long it's going to take, so that we can communicate that.
Great, thank you so much.
So I'm just looking at the time, and I think we're actually not going to get to the questions that I'd put forth originally, which I think is fine because this is great. And thank you for all of these questions. I do think 1:30 is the end point, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Cassandra?
Hey, Anna, it's Karen. I'm just hopping in
Oh.
for Cassandra.
Oh.
I think her Zoom may have crashed. So that is correct. We are hopping back to the main room now, wrapping up here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.